Damien Cole signed the check for $18,000, his mistress's final semester tuition, while his pregnant wife stood 3 feet away washing dishes. But what made him smile wasn't the affair itself. It was how effortlessly stupid he believed Elara to be. Investment strategy? He'd mocked her just yesterday when she'd asked about his work, his voice dripping with the condescension of a man who'd built his entire identity on credentials his wife supposedly lacked. Sweetheart, you'd need at least a master's degree to even understand the terminology we use at Voss Capital. He worked at Voss Capital Group as a senior finance manager, proud of his title, his office, his growing reputation, completely unaware that the woman he called uneducated each evening was the reason the Voss name existed at all. Elara Voss had inherited the empire from her father, operated it through legal aliases to escape the spotlight after his death, and married Damien to answer one simple question: would he love her without knowing who she was? 3 years later, 7 months into her pregnancy, she finally had her answer. His mother, Gloria, made sure of that during Sunday dinners. Her academic pedigree wielded like a weapon as she compared her daughter-in-law to furniture, present but not particularly valuable. "My son deserves a genius, not a simpleton like you," Gloria announced at last week's gathering, her retired professor credentials somehow making the cruelty sound intellectual rather than vicious. Tyra Banks, the mistress whose MBA Damien funded with money stolen from his joint account with Elara, sat in the third row of Hartfield University's auditorium, completely convinced she'd won a prize. The successful husband, the executive lifestyle, the escape from being just a wife without letters after her name. She adjusted her graduation cap, unaware that the woman she'd helped destroy was about to be introduced as Hartfield's largest donor in 140 years. The dean stepped to the podium, his smile wide with the satisfaction of announcing historical news. But Damien barely listened because he was too busy texting Tara congratulations under the table, while his mother whispered about finally having an educated woman in the family. Then he heard it. Elara Voss Cole, silent chairwoman of Voss Capital Group, $200 million endowment, founder and sole owner. The words arrived in fragments because Damien's brain refused to assemble them into reality. But his body understood first. His hands went cold, his vision narrowed, his heart kicked against his chest like something trying to escape. The auditorium doors opened, and Elara walked through them, transformed from invisible to unavoidable, her pregnancy elegant rather than apologetic. Her tailored ivory blazer announcing power his eyes had refused to see across 3 years of marriage. Board members flanked her like guards protecting royalty, because that's exactly what she was. Royalty he'd mocked at breakfast and betrayed by dinner. Gloria's face collapsed like a building losing its foundation, every academic credential suddenly worthless against the reality approaching the stage. Tara stood frozen, her diploma trembling in her hands, the degree she'd earned with stolen money now permanently attached to her greatest mistake. Elara reached the microphone and spoke with the quiet devastation of someone who'd spent years being underestimated and had finally decided to clarify exactly who she'd been all along. How long had Elara known about the affair? How many cruel comments had she absorbed while planning this precise moment of revelation? What happens to a man who discovers he didn't climb the corporate ladder, but was simply allowed to think he had? And what remains of his identity when the woman he called simple reveals herself as the empire he'd pretended to serve? Dear viewers, what you're about to witness the unraveling of a man who confused silence with stupidity and learned too late that true intelligence knows when to speak and when to simply watch people reveal themselves. This story will teach you about the dangers of judging competence by credentials alone, show you how arrogance blinds us to the truth standing right in front of us, and reveal why the people we underestimate often hold more power than those we praise. Only you'll discover that real strength doesn't need validation, that karma operates with surgical precision, and that the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't hate them. It's give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves while you document every knot. Drop your thoughts in the comments about what shocked you most and what you'd do if you discovered your partner had been secretly powerful all along. Subscribe for more stories that combine devastating twists with life-changing wisdom. Elara Voss Cole had learned to make herself small, not physically, Her pregnancy made that impossible now, her belly round and prominent at 7 months. But in every other way that mattered. She spoke in soft tones that people often asked her to repeat. She wore clothes in muted colors that helped her blend into furniture. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when dismissed, and had perfected the art of disappearing while remaining in the room. Her husband preferred it that way. Damien Cole stood at the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, his pressed suit sharp enough to cut, his cologne expensive enough to announce itself before he entered a room. He scrolled through his phone with one hand while accepting the coffee Elara handed him with the other, never making eye contact. His attention already at the office he hadn't physically reached yet. "I have the Westbrook presentation today," he said to his screen, not to her. "Show you the portfolio analysis I've been working on for 3 months. This could put me on track for VP." Elara poured herself herbal tea, her movements slow and careful around her belly. "That sounds important." "It is important." He finally looked at her, but his eyes held that familiar glaze of impatience, the expression of someone forced to explain complex concepts to a child. "We're talking about a $400 million investment strategy, asset allocation, risk assessment, diversification protocols." He stopped, shaking his head with a small laugh. "You know what? Never mind. You wouldn't understand any of this anyway." She stirred honey into her tea, watching the golden swirl dissolve. "Why wouldn't I understand?" The question seemed to surprise him, as if his coffee cup had suddenly asked for his opinion. "Elara, sweetheart, you didn't even finish community college. I'm not saying that to be cruel, I'm just stating facts. Financial strategy requires years of education, specialized knowledge, analytical thinking." He trailed off, already bored with explaining. "It's not your fault. We all have different strengths." "What are my strengths?" she asked quietly. He glanced at his watch, signaling the conversation's conclusion. "You're a great cook. You keep the house nice. You're going to be a good mother." He said these things like handing out participation trophies. Not everyone needs to be a finance executive. And Elara, the world needs supportive people too. She said nothing, which he took as agreement rather than what it actually was, documentation. Damien grabbed his briefcase, kissed the air near her cheek without actual contact, and headed toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, his back to her. "Oh, I'll be late tonight. Department dinner celebrating Tara's graduation next week. She's finally finishing her MBA." His tone carried an enthusiasm he never used when discussing Elara's life. 2 years of intensive study while working full-time. That kind of dedication is really impressive, you know? Elara's hand rested on her belly, feeling their daughter kick as if in protest. "I'm sure it is. You should think about taking some classes yourself," he added, his voice carrying that helpful tone people use when suggesting vegetables to children. "Maybe something simple. Cooking classes, interior design, something you'd actually enjoy and could handle." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like punctuation. Elara stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her tea cooling in her hands, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a garden she'd designed herself. Then she walked upstairs to their bedroom, opened the closet, went and pulled out a leather portfolio from behind her winter coats. The place Damien never looked because organizing their closet was her domain. Inside the portfolio, quarterly reports from Voss Capital Group marked confidential, board review only. Financial statements showing her signature, E. Voss, authorizing every major decision the company had made in the last 3 years. Legal documents establishing her ownership through a trust her father had created before his death. Yet photographs from the office she maintained under her legal name, not her married one. In the executive suite Damien had never been invited to visit. And beneath those, bank statements showing transfers from their joint investment account, the one Damien controlled, to Hartfield University's tuition payment center. $18,000 last semester. $19,500 the semester before. $17,200 before that. Small amounts at first, growing bolder as his confidence in her ignorance grew. She'd known about Tara Banks since the first payment. She'd known about the affair since the second. She'd known everything, actually, because the head of Voss Capital Security reported directly to her. and the invisible wife had access to information her husband couldn't imagine existed. Elara pulled out her phone, not the basic model Damien had given her, because you don't need all those complicated features, but the secure device her assistant had provided, encrypted and untraceable. She opened her messages and typed carefully, "Confirm graduation ceremony arrangements. I'll need the full board present. Transport leaves at 2 p.m. And Marcus, make sure the financial quarterly photographer gets the angles we discussed. This only happens once." She sent the message, placed the phone back in the portfolio, and returned everything to its hiding place behind the coats. Then she went downstairs and began preparing dinner for a husband who thought she couldn't spell investment. But she could spell other words just fine. Words like embezzlement, words like divorce, words like revenge. Tara Banks had never felt guilty about being the other woman, because in her carefully constructed worldview, she wasn't. She was the upgrade. She sat in the corner booth of Marcello's, a restaurant expensive enough to require reservations, but not so expensive that Damien couldn't afford it on his finance manager's salary, reviewing her thesis notes while waiting for him to arrive. Her laptop displayed charts and graphs about market volatility. Her MBA thesis titled Risk Management in Emerging Markets, commanding the screen with academic authority. This degree had cost her nothing financially, but everything emotionally, and she'd made peace with that transaction years ago. Damien arrived 12 minutes late, which was early for him, loosening his tie as he slid into the booth across from her. His smile carried the satisfied exhaustion of a man who believed he was successfully managing two lives without either woman suspecting the complexity of his balancing act. "How's the graduate?" he asked, signaling the waiter without looking at him. Exhausted, relieved, terrified. Tara closed her laptop, giving him her attention the way she'd learned he required, complete and admiring. "I still can't believe I'm actually done. 2 years of 16-hour days, and it's finally finished." "You earned it," Damien said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "That kind of discipline is rare. Most people talk about getting their MBA, but never follow through. They don't have what it takes." The implication hung between them like expensive perfume. Most people meaning his wife, the woman neither of them mentioned by name, but both thought about constantly. Tara had met Elara exactly once, at a company holiday party 18 months ago. Not before the affair began, but after Damien had already started complaining about his marriage to anyone who would listen. Elara had worn a simple navy dress, stood near the wall holding sparkling water instead of champagne, and smiled pleasantly when introduced, but contributed nothing to the conversation about market trends and investment strategies that dominated the evening. "She's sweet," Tara had said afterward, the word sweet carrying all the dismissive weight of someone describing a golden retriever. "She's simple," Damien had corrected, and something in his tone had suggested this simplicity was both his burden and his excuse for whatever came next. What came next was Tara's tuition payments, funded by transfers Damien made from what he called our investment account, the joint account he shared with his simple wife, who wouldn't know a diversified portfolio from a grocery list. And the waiter arrived with wine Damien ordered without consulting the menu, the kind of casual confidence that came from eating at places like this regularly. Tara wondered sometimes if Elara had ever been to Marcello's, then decided probably not, because restaurants like this required you to understand wine lists and maintain conversation and be something other than decorative. "My mother wants to meet you," Damien said suddenly, swirling his wine like he'd seen executives do in movies about successful men. Tara's stomach performed a small flip, excitement mixed with calculation. "Really? She'll be at your graduation ceremony next week. She's been asking about you for months, actually. Ever since I mentioned you were finishing your MBA." He leaned back, his smile turning conspiratorial. "She's a retired economics professor, Stanford. Well, she has very specific opinions about intelligence and education and what kind of woman belongs in certain families." The implication was clear. Tara was that kind of woman. Elara was not. "What about—" Tara paused delicately, the pause doing the work the name would have done. "She won't be there," Damien said quickly, answering a question Tara hadn't technically asked. "She doesn't really do well at academic events. Gets overwhelmed by all the formal talk. It's better this way. You'll get to meet my mother properly without any awkwardness. Tara nodded, accepting this explanation, the way she accepted all his explanations about his marriage, as truth rather than what it actually was, which was permission to avoid guilt. But sometimes late at night, when Damien had gone home to his pregnant wife and Tara sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by textbooks he'd paid for, she wondered about the woman who'd indirectly funded her education. Because she wondered if Elara suspected, if she knew, if she cared. Then Tara would remember seeing her at that holiday party, quiet, unassuming, wearing a dress that probably came from a department store, and decided that Elara definitely didn't know, probably wouldn't understand if she did, and almost certainly lacked the sophistication to do anything about it, even if she somehow found out. After all, what could a woman like that possibly do against someone with credentials? Across town, in an executive suite Tara had never visited, Elara Voss signed a termination letter with Damien's name on it, dated for the Monday following Hartfield University's graduation ceremony. The signature was elegant, practiced, and absolutely final. She placed the letter in a folder marked Personnel Actions Confidential and handed it to her head of security, a former federal investigator named Marcus Chen, who'd worked for her father before his death and now reported exclusively to her. "Oh, everything is arranged?" she asked quietly. "The dean knows his marks. The photographer knows his angles. The board will be seated in section C, rows 2 through 4. Your entrance is timed for exactly 10:47 a.m., 3 minutes after the dean begins his remarks about the endowment." Marcus paused, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Voss, are you certain about the public nature of this reveal? We could handle the termination and divorce privately?" "No," Elara said softly, her hand resting on her belly where her daughter kicked. "He called me uneducated in front of his colleagues. His mother called me a simpleton in front of my own dinner table. His mistress wore the confidence he bought her with my money." She looked up, her eyes holding a clarity that made Marcus remember why her father had built an empire. The Voss family didn't just win, they made sure everyone understood exactly what losing looked like. "They made me invisible on purpose, Marcus. So I'm going to let them see me all at once. I want witnesses." Marcus nodded once, recognizing the tone of a woman who'd made a final decision months ago and had simply been waiting for the perfect moment to execute it. That moment would arrive in 6 days. At Marcello's, Damien raised his wine glass toward Tara, proposing a toast to her achievement, her intelligence, her future, all the things he'd told her she possessed that his wife lacked. Tara clinked her glass against his, smiling with the confidence of a woman who believed she'd won a prize. She had no idea the prize was already calculating the exact cost of her hubris, down to the dollar and the second. Hartfield University's Whitmore Auditorium held 1,200 seats, but Damien only cared about 3 of them. His own seat in row 7, positioned perfectly to watch Tara across the stage. His mother Gloria's seat beside him, her presence validating every choice he'd made in the past 2 years. And Tara's seat among the graduates in Section A, where she sat radiant in her cap and gown, finally holding the credentials that made her worthy of being loved publicly instead of secretly. The seat at home where his pregnant wife presumably sat watching television. That one didn't factor into his calculations at all. Gloria adjusted her silk scarf, her retired professor credentials worn like invisible badges across her chest. She'd taught economics at Stanford for 30 years, published 4 books, and raised a son she believed had inherited her intellectual superiority. That son had finally found a woman who matched his potential, and today marked the official beginning of what Gloria considered the correct version of her family's future. "She's stunning," Gloria murmured, watching Tara through opera glasses she'd brought specifically for this occasion. "Intelligence looks good on a woman. It's such a shame when potential is wasted on people who can't appreciate it." Damien knew she was talking about Elara without saying her name, the way his mother had perfected the art of insult through implication. Tara's thesis was on emerging market risk management. She's already had 3 interview requests from firms that recruited directly from the program. As she should, Gloria lowered her opera glasses, satisfaction smoothing her features. Education opens doors, Damien. It separates those who lead from those who follow. Your father understood that. I understand that. And now you've found someone who understands that. The ceremony began with the traditional processional. Faculty members in colorful academic regalia filing onto the stage like a parade of credentials. The dean of Hartfield's School of Business took the podium, his smile broad and practiced, his voice carrying the polished enthusiasm of a man about to announce something he genuinely believed mattered. Good morning, graduates, families, and distinguished guests. Before we begin today's commencement exercises, I have the profound honor of sharing news that will shape Hartfield's future for generations to come. Damien felt his mother lean forward slightly, her attention sharpening. Announcements like this usually meant building dedications or scholarship funds, the kind of philanthropic gestures that impress people who measured worth in institutional legacy. This morning, Hartfield University received the largest single endowment in our 140-year history, a transformational gift of $200 million to our School of Business. The auditorium erupted in gasps and applause. Damien clapped automatically, his brain calculating what $200 million meant for a business school, for its reputation, for graduates like Tara, whose degrees would now carry even more prestige. When this extraordinary generosity comes from a woman whose own path to success defied traditional educational structures, who built one of the most formidable financial empires on the continent without ever completing a formal degree herself. Something cold touched the base of Damien's spine, a warning his conscious mind hadn't yet processed but his body recognized as danger approaching. A woman who understood that true intelligence cannot be measured solely by credentials, but by vision, strategy, and the courage to build something lasting in a world that often mistakes silence for inability. Gloria's opera glasses slipped slightly in her hands. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound privilege to welcome to this stage the founder and silent chairwoman of Voss Capital Group, Mrs. Elara Voss Cole. The name landed like a detonation. Damien's brain refused to process the words in order. Elara Voss Capital Group Chairman, $200 million. His wife, his company, his impossible. The words wouldn't connect because connecting them required accepting a reality that shattered every assumption he'd built his identity upon. The auditorium doors at the back of the hall opened, and Elara walked through them. But she wasn't the Elara he'd left at home that morning. The one in comfortable clothes with her hair pulled back simply, who'd smiled and said nothing when he announced he'd be late. This Elara wore a tailored ivory blazer that must have cost more than his monthly salary, worn her pregnancy elegant rather than apologetic, her dark hair styled in a way that suggested professional stylists and executive decisions. Two men in expensive suits flanked her. Board members, Damien realized with sickening clarity, because he'd seen them in the Voss Capital executive suite, but had never questioned why they were there or who they reported to. A photographer from Financial Quarterly followed 3 steps behind, his camera already capturing what would apparently be a historic moment. Elara walked down the center aisle with the measured pace of someone who'd walked into boardrooms and commanded them, who'd signed documents worth millions, who'd built empires while her husband explained finance to her like she was a child struggling with arithmetic. She passed row 7 without looking at Damien, but he felt her awareness of his presence like radiation, invisible but undeniable, and already destroying him at the cellular level. Gloria made a sound beside him that might have been a word if her throat hadn't forgotten how language worked. On stage, Tara stood frozen among the other graduates, her diploma clutched in her hands, her face cycling through expressions too quickly to identify individually. Confusion, recognition, horror, understanding, and finally the terrible comprehension of someone realizing they'd been holding a winning lottery ticket while standing in someone else's house. Elara reached the stage and climbed the steps with a grace that suggested she'd done this before, that stages and audiences and moments of public importance were familiar territory rather than overwhelming experiences. She reached the podium and adjusted the microphone with the casual competence of someone comfortable with technology, soccer with public speaking, with being seen. Then she looked out at the auditorium, her eyes scanning faces until they landed on Damien's for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, he understood everything. She'd known about the affairs. She'd known about the stolen money. She'd known about his contempt, his mother's cruelty, Tara's complicity. She'd known, and she'd documented, and she'd waited for precisely this moment when the truth would have maximum impact and minimum mercy. Her expression wasn't angry or triumphant. It was simply clear, the look of someone who'd asked a question 3 years ago and had finally received a complete answer. "I was told once," Elara said into the microphone, her voice soft but amplified across 1,200 seats, "that a woman without a degree has nothing to offer the world." The audience was silent, 1,200 people holding their breath. I'd like to dedicate this gift to every woman who was told she was a simpleton and build an empire in the silence they gave her. The applause that erupted wasn't polite academic acknowledgement. It was recognition, validation, the sound of people understanding they were witnessing something more significant than a donation. They were witnessing a reckoning. Damien sat paralyzed in row 7, his hands frozen mid-clap, his brain finally processing what his body had known for the last 90 seconds. His wife wasn't simple. She'd never been simple. She'd been testing him, and he'd failed so spectacularly that the failure now had 1,200 witnesses and a photographer from Financial Quarterly. Gloria's opera glasses fell from her hands and shattered against the floor. Crystal fragments scattering like her assumptions about intelligence, education, and which women deserved respect. On stage, Elara shook hands with the dean, accepted a ceremonial plaque, and exited through the stage door as smoothly as she'd entered, leaving behind an auditorium full of people who would remember this moment, and a man in row 7 whose entire life had just ended while he sat watching. The ceremony continued, but Damien heard none of it. He was too busy calculating how long his keycard would work on Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with the cruel indifference of a system that doesn't pause for personal catastrophes. Damien Cole stood in the lobby of Voss Capital Group at 7:47 a.m., his keycard pressed against the security reader for the 3rd time, watching the red light blink its rejection like a heartbeat flatly refusing to revive. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside." The security guard's voice carried professional detachment. In the tone of someone executing orders they'd received from management levels Damien had thought he understood, but clearly never had. "There's a mistake," Damien said, his voice emerging thin and strange, as if his throat had forgotten its own mechanics. "I'm senior finance manager. I've worked here for 6 years. My card, something's wrong with the system." "No, sir. Amber, the system is working correctly." The guard gestured toward the lobby seating area, where a woman from Human Resources waited with a manila envelope that looked exactly like what it was, a termination package. "Ms. Patterson needs to speak with you." The HR representative stood as he approached, her expression carefully arranged into neutral sympathy, the look of someone who delivered bad news before, but never to someone who just discovered his wife owned the building he was being fired from. Mr. Cole, I need you to understand this conversation is being recorded for legal purposes." She handed him the envelope without ceremony. "Your employment with Voss Capital Group has been terminated effective immediately. The documentation inside outlines the specific violations that led to this decision, primarily concerning misappropriation of personal funds through company-affiliated accounts." Damien's hands shook as he opened the envelope, but his eyes couldn't focus on the words because his brain kept showing him images from Saturday. Elara on that stage, Elara in that blazer, Elara dedicating $200 million to women who'd been called simpletons. Elara walking past him without acknowledgement, while 1,200 people realized what he'd been too arrogant to see. "There's been a misunderstanding," he managed, though he knew there hadn't been. "I need to speak with the executive team. I need to explain." The decision came from the acting chairwoman's office directly. Ms. Patterson's tone remained professionally flat. "It's final and non-negotiable. Security will escort you out. Your personal items will be shipped to your residence by Wednesday." The chairwoman, his wife. The woman he'd called uneducated while she signed his paychecks through legal structures he'd never bothered to question because her last name was Voss and his workplace was Voss Capital, and somehow his brain had never connected those dots into the pattern they'd always formed. His phone buzzed as security escorted him through the lobby, his mother calling for the 8th time since Saturday, her voicemails progressing from confused to angry, to something that sounded like grief. So Gloria Cole's entire identity had been constructed on a foundation of academic superiority, and watching her simpleton daughter-in-law command a standing ovation at a graduation ceremony had shattered that foundation like expired concrete. Damien didn't answer because he had no answers. Only the growing understanding that his life had been dismantled with the same strategic precision his wife apparently brought to building financial empires. By Tuesday, when his lawyer had reviewed the prenuptial agreement Damien had signed 3 years ago, the document he'd barely read because he'd been so certain he was marrying down that protecting his assets seemed unnecessary. The lawyer's summary arrived in an email with a subject line that said simply, "We have a problem." The problem was that the prenup included an infidelity clause that voided Damien's rights to any Voss family assets, including the investment accounts he'd been drawing from, with a home he'd been living in, and any claim to shared property accumulated during the marriage. The mistress whose education he'd funded with stolen money had essentially signed his financial death warrant the moment she'd accepted his first tuition payment. "The documentation is extensive," his lawyer wrote. "Bank records, security footage, communications. Someone was building a case for a very long time." Someone, his wife, and the billionaire he'd mocked over breakfast while she documented his betrayal with the methodical precision of someone who understood that revenge wasn't emotional. It was evidence collected patiently until the perfect moment arrived to present it. Wednesday brought Tara's text message, brief and cowardly. "I can't see you anymore. I got a job offer from Meridian Financial. They made it clear your name can't be associated with my career. I'm sorry." She wasn't sorry. She was protecting herself. So because the woman whose degree had been funded by embezzled money from a billionaire wasn't actually stupid, just morally flexible enough to accept the funding and strategic enough to abandon the source once it became professionally toxic. Damien sat in his mother's guest room, the house he'd grown up in, now his only refuge, scrolling through news articles about Elara's donation. Financial Quarterly had published their cover story Tuesday morning. "The billionaire who built in silence, Elara Voss Cole's quiet empire." The article included photos he'd never seen: Elara in boardrooms, Elara signing documents, Elara at charity functions he'd never known she attended. There was even a photo from their wedding 3 years ago with a caption that read, "Voss Cole stepped back from public life following her father's death in 2022, not maintaining control of the empire through legal structures that protected her privacy during a period of grief." During a period of grief. While he'd been calling her uneducated, she'd been mourning her father and running a billion-dollar company, and apparently testing whether her husband loved her or just tolerated her as a convenient domestic accessory. He'd failed that test so completely that the failure now had its own Wikipedia page. Thursday afternoon, he drove to their home, her home, illegally, though the mortgage had always been in her name, and he'd simply never questioned why. 2 moving trucks sat in the driveway, his belongings already packed by professionals he hadn't hired, but who'd clearly received instructions from someone with authority and resources. Elara answered the door wearing comfortable clothes, her pregnancy now 8 months along, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She looked tired but not devastated. "It need to understand," Damien said. "Hating need to understand," Damien said, hating how his voice cracked on the last word. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were? Why let me think that I was simple?" Elara finished quietly. "Because I wanted a husband, Damien, not an investor, not someone who loved me because of what I owned." She paused, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that hurt more than anger would have. "I wanted to know if you'd value me without the empire. You answered that question very clearly. I made mistakes," he tried, knowing even as he said it that mistakes was inadequate for 3 years of contempt, stolen money, and public humiliation. "You called me a simpleton in front of your colleagues," Elara said softly. "You funded your mistress's education with our money while telling me I was too stupid to understand investments. Your mother mocked me at our own dinner table while you smiled." She touched her belly where their daughter kicked. "I let you because I needed to know who you were when you thought no one important was watching. And now," his voice barely qualified as a whisper, "now I know." She stepped back, preparing to close the door. "Your belongings are packed. The divorce papers are with your lawyer. Our daughter will be a Voss, not a Cole, and you'll have supervised visitation rights outlined in the custody agreement." "Elara, please. I gave you 3 years to see me," she said, her voice still gentle despite the devastation it carried. You never looked. That's not my failure, Damien. It's yours. The door closed with a soft click that sounded exactly like the morning he'd left for Tara's graduation. Casual, final, the sound of something ending without drama or ceremony. Damien stood on the porch of a house he'd never actually owned, looking at a door that wouldn't open again, understanding too late that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone ignored. 6 months later, Elara gave birth to Vera Voss in a private suite at Mercy Hospital, surrounded by board members who sent flowers and a mother-in-law who sent nothing because Gloria Cole had retired from public life entirely. Her academic credentials suddenly worthless currency in a world that had watched her mock a billionaire. The Financial Quarterly article announcing Vera's birth ran beside another story. Voss Capital announces international expansion. Empire grows as founder steps back into spotlight. Damien saw the article in the waiting room of the mid-tier accounting firm where he now worked, his senior finance manager title reduced to consultant on business cards that nobody requested. He kept the magazine on his desk as a reminder of something he couldn't quite articulate. Not revenge or loss exactly, but the precise cost of underestimating someone who'd been powerful all along. Tara Banks built a quiet career at Meridian Financial, her MBA hanging on her office wall. Her relationship with Damien scrubbed from her professional history like malware removed from a clean system. And Elara sat in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the city, Vera sleeping in a bassinet beside her desk, signing papers that would shape economies while her daughter dreamed infant dreams of a world where power didn't need to announce itself because it simply existed. Undeniable, absolute, and belonging to women who'd built empires in the silence others had given them. She'd learned to make herself small once. She would never teach her daughter that skill. Some lessons once learned die with the women who survived them.